CBAM stands for the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Don't say that too fast, it's a tongue twister. So CBAM is essentially an environmental policy framework. It is currently live in the EU and will be coming into practice in the UK from January 2027. Number one, you need to check if you're in scope, because that's obviously critical to any journey. Number two, I would say stop estimating and start measuring. I would make that so key to your process in this, because I think, yes, you can get away with estimations, but you're only going to harm yourself down the line. And again, when you're looking at your supply chain and future-proofing your business, they will expect accurate information, and if you can't provide it, another SME or another company will.
Welcome back to Made to Grow, the podcast for ambitious SME manufacturers, brought to you by FlowLens. This is a big one. We're kicking off Series 4 for 2026, and we're diving straight into a topic that is quickly moving from a future regulation to present-day competitive necessity, CBAM, aka the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. To guide us through the complexities and opportunities, I'm delighted to welcome Rebecca Meadows, founder and MD of Nexus Earth Group, a sustainability consultancy focused specifically on the manufacturing world. For UK manufacturers, 2026 is a crucial prep year before the 2027 deadline, whilst EU rules are now in force. Prospects are no longer just looking at price and quality, they are demanding accurate, auditable carbon data from their supply chain. Rebecca cuts through the jargon to explain why getting a handle on your data now just isn't about compliance. It's about future-proofing your contracts and unlocking massive potential for operational efficiency and cost savings. Let's dive into the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and what it means for you. So I'm delighted to welcome Rebecca Meadows, who's founder and MD of Nexus Earth Group, who are a sustainability consultancy focusing mainly on the manufacturing world. So welcome to Made to Grow, Rebecca.
Thank you for inviting me, Rich. It's great to be involved.
Pleasure. So could you give the listeners a wee bit more background about what you do? And I should start by saying that the topic of today's conversation is broadly around CBAM and the nuances between UK and EU implementations, and the reason why we're kicking off 2026 with this, as you'll probably tell us more, is it's now coming into effect. But just to give the listeners some context, could you just introduce yourself and the business?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So hello everyone, I'm Rebecca, Director of Nexus Earth. We are, as Rich says, a sustainability consultancy mainly focused on supporting SME manufacturers, and we support companies through energy procurement. If they're looking to reduce their energy, be more sustainable, we can help with that. We can help with reporting and regulations and framework, and obviously we're going to talk about CBAM today, so that is one framework that's in place, and we can also help to access grants and funding where applicable, because we aim to leverage what support is already out there. Let's not reinvent the wheel for SMEs. There's enough to navigate, so there is support out there, and we will help to connect you to that as well. And we also work with local authorities. So if it's a specific program designed to help engineers, production, manufacturing, those sort of sectors, we can help support and deliver. And we've previously done that through one example with UK Shared Prosperity Fund. We worked with Cheshire West. That was a great program, 80 businesses involved. So yeah, we've got a lot of fingers and a lot of pies.
Brilliant. It's brilliant to be able to support the SME community, both directly, but also through the kind of local council, enterprise agency, chambers kind of world, because that's where a lot of SMEs go to, for information. And also, I suppose, in today's environment, as an SME ourselves, it's is this another thing that I have to do that isn't actually involved in running the business and adding value to customers. But I think there is a silver lining to this, certainly from an efficiency and cost point of view, never mind an environmental kind of an optimization point of view. But could you just elaborate more on CBAM and the what do listeners need to know?
Sure. So let's start with CBAM as an overview, like you said. So CBAM stands for the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Don't say that too fast, it's a tongue twister. So CBAM is essentially an environmental policy framework. It is currently live in the EU. And will be coming into practice in the UK from January 2027. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But essentially, it is to make sure or reduce the risk of carbon leakage. So it's trying to de-incentivize production moving to countries where there's lesser climate regulations in place, and making sure that importers, they will burden the cost of any production that is moved to try and get around decarbonisation and climate action. It's making sure that trade on a global scale is a level playing field, and it protects SMEs, and it definitely will when it's brought into the UK as well. So essentially, the importer has a financial responsibility to declare the carbon, the embodied carbon of the product that has been imported into that country. Similarly, the UK will be the same. And the exporter, they are going to be asked for their data for embodied carbon. And so this is where it's important to have a grasp on your data, because then that can translate to carbon data. And like I said, CBAM in the UK is coming into play January 2027. So now is the perfect time to be prepared and get ready for that and start to engage supply chain. And some customers of ours, they've already had CBAM on the radar because they're exporting to the EU. And because of that, the EU companies are requiring their data. Essentially, they're looking at say scope 1, scope 2 emissions. You might have heard of that as sort of the greenhouse gas emissions. So it's the same thing. We're looking at all the carbon that is associated with that product. And that is hopefully a good explanation of what CBAM is.
Brilliant, Rebecca. And at the minute, in terms of what's sort of in scope, pardon the misuse of scope 1 and scope 2, but so not every product that you're importing or exporting is currently covered by this. It's really like raw materials. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, essentially it is sectors such as aluminium, cement, hydrogen, fertilizer, iron and steel, and electricity. When regarding the EU, when we're looking at the UK have decided to not include electricity just because of where the majority of electricity production comes from. I think Norway and EU countries for the UK, but it's those 6-7 sectors primarily, and that's because they have a higher embodied carbon level than other products and other sectors, essentially. So it's focused on the biggest polluters, but it will probably be broadening the scope in years to come. So it's, even if you're not in scope, I would still suggest it presents an opportunity to look and assess your production and your operations and your supply chain, and like I said, get a handle on that data, because it is only then going to present a opportunity to optimize your resource, your supply chain, and effectively impact your bottom line in the process. So it's definitely shouldn't be seen as a burden. It's definitely an opportunity. So yeah, those sectors are included. And it also matters as well the value of the goods being exported, imported. And in the UK, it's £50,000 of the value of the goods being imported into the UK.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so UK has another 12 months of grace. This is 2027. But I'm thinking a lot of companies will obviously, well, in our world, we're thinking mainly around steel and aluminium, because a lot of either components just made out of them, whether little components or you name it. So we wouldn't be a long time in spending £50,000 in terms of that kind of material coming in, before it starts to impact uh, your eligibility, to be compliant. Um, so in terms of some of the projects that you've worked on, like you've mentioned that systems are the key to making this as painless as possible. So I take it there's a lot of interaction with in terms of the supply chain. How have you seen that actually working in practice in terms of getting that information exchange up and running? Is it something as simple as regular sharing of spreadsheet data, or people getting into the mindset of more automated solutions?
Yeah, essentially both. So we've had companies who have been asked by their supply chain, you need to provide this data for us to then report our carbon. And we also know that companies are looking for automated solutions, and we encourage that, because anything you can do to reduce the manual and the resource and the time involved in quarterly reporting, as it will be, that's a huge cost to your business alone. And in today's digital world, there are so many avenues to go down to help you. And there's funds available like Made Smarter. There's even in terms of collecting your energy data, small companies think that, it's going to be a huge amount of investment. And actually, some low cost sensors on the market, they're £200 with a Raspberry Pi to collect that data. So it is not a significant cost as people perceive it to be. And once you have that data, you can then see your production from, a bird's eye view of everything that's going on. And it will, sometimes as well, in certain cases, it's opened companies' eyes as to, we were going to invest in, say, robotics or something that is quite high tech, big investment. And actually, we've looked at the data and we found that, well, actually, that oven, that's actually not that efficient. So you'd be best investing in that, which is a lesser cost to the business than something that is shiny and new. So sometimes it's in the small changes and the lower cost changes that you'll see the greatest difference. And hopefully that should give confidence to SMEs, because again, it's an opportunity to understand your data. And when you understand that, you're then not exposing yourself to the risk of actually incurring more charges, because again, you can use default thresholds for estimated emissions, but you will incur the highest charge because that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to incentivize real data and real measurement.
It's interesting. We first met through the Smart Manufacturing Data Hub project, and one of the other partners on that was DevTank, and they have some fascinating stories about the sensors that they've deployed with different customers. And something as simple as you say, like an oven or a fan or a compressor that's been left on overnight, or lights that are being used for longer hours than necessary. Just little stories that have actually wouldn't have been at all obvious if it wasn't for the fact that the data was there to say. There's one in particular where there was a factory where somebody was coming in at 6 and turning all the machines on, thinking they were doing everyone a favor, getting everything warmed up, but the shift didn't start till 7. So the electricity was spiking not spiking, but it was kicking in for an hour every day, and they were able to eradicate that spend overnight. So yeah, it's having the means of capturing the data and easily interpreting it for day to day use. Never mind being able to then feed that through into the reporting mechanism. So how does the actual reporting piece work? I mean, we're all familiar with our tax returns and so on. How do we report or on a quarterly basis back to what the activity has been?
Yeah, so the UK CBAM will be managed by HMRC. So it works effectively like a tax return. It's designed to be, hopefully a less administratively, a burden for SMEs. It's meant to be a really simple process and not too heavy on the admin. So it will effectively operate like a tax return, and you will submit your quarterly figures to HMRC. So again, ask HMRC, ask support providers for help if you don't know if you're in scope or what you're reporting. We can also hopefully, in the podcast link or description, we've got tools that SMEs can use to estimate what their costs would look like and get a handle on what the sorry, I've lost my point there. What the impact would be. So yeah, we can put that in the description because we've got tools and resources to look at that cost.
The Made to Grow podcast is brought to you by FlowLens, the simple, affordable MRP system specifically designed for SME device, equipment and machinery manufacturers. Our top-rated cloud-based software can help you cut down on wasted materials, time and money, and eliminate the chaos of running your manufacturing with spreadsheets and hope. Our customers have reported savings of over a day per week per person in their business by cutting out needless admin, duplication of work and countless mistakes. Plus, lead times are shortened by up to 75%. And after hundreds of successful implementations, we've got the blueprint for manufacturing success nailed down. Head over to flowlens.com for a quick video tour of the software and to hear from more manufacturers like you who have transformed their businesses with FlowLens. Now, back to the interview. So what sort of information do you need to have at hand to be able to plug into your calculator to be able to get a kind of a realistic answer or assessment of where you're at?
So you would need to allow yourself to understand what your total cost is going to be. It's going to be your embodied carbon of the product that you are importing into the UK, and you will need that data from suppliers. So whether that's EU or non-EU suppliers, you need that data. You then need to understand as well if the country you are importing from has already contributed to another CBAM, or it might be the emissions trade scheme. If they've already had a cost associated with that carbon, you can reduce that fee that you pay because it's effectively already being counted for in production. And so then if you get your total, it should be, again, embodied carbon, your scope 1, scope 2, your supply chain emissions, so the emissions in production, the indirect emissions, so direct is like, sort of the fuel that you're using in your production. Indirect might be the electricity and things like that. And then scope 3, your supply chain emissions. So it effectively operates the same as your greenhouse gas emissions, and understanding that data will give you a real good solid step in applying it to CBAM.
I take it at this stage, the suppliers, this is they've had plenty of time to prepare for this. So if I wanted to get that data from my suppliers today, if they're not already supplying it by default, they will have it. So you're finding that it is becoming pretty standard these days then in terms of people who've been preparing for this?
Yeah, we've had a lot of SMEs who looking at EU CBAM, for example. We've had SMEs who they might have a customer in the UK who is then exporting to the EU, and because of that, they now need your data. So it is becoming more common for the supply chain to be requesting this data, and so that's why it's really key to be on top of it. Because if, for example, your business, it might rely on 70% in a specific industry, a specific partner, you are then at risk, because if you can't provide that data, they can just go to another company who can provide data, who's maybe got a lower carbon count and will effectively reduce the overall cost and admin burden on them. So it's really important to maintain contracts and, effectively future-proof your business.
just one specific point you made earlier on was, about that kind of flow through of material. Um, so let's say I buy steel billets for machining parts, but I'm buying them from my supplier locally, but they've sourced that um, externally, or how does it flow through if they're effectively the primary importer of that steel? Do I have anything to pay, or will there be a bit of a sort of a pass through effect?
Yeah, so if you are, I think it's really key to remember. So, as an importer, you are responsible for the financial end cost. And if you are an exporter, you're likely going to be asked for your data to provide to the importer. And so it again can get complex with supply chain and subsidiaries and different companies. But if we just remember who is importing and who is exporting, then that simplifies things. Even if you're not in scope, you need to have a handle on this because it will be expanding, and effectively, somewhere down the line, you will be responsible to provide your data in that supply chain and in the value chain. And again, if you are an importer and you are responsible for the important of the goods, you will bear the financial responsibility to declare that to HMRC, or if you're an EU company, it'll be different. It's on a certificate basis. But it's also important to note and to clarify that while the importer responsibility is, in this example, on the UK steel supplier, and they are the ones that report to HMRC, the cost will still be passed down to you if you're procuring from them. And it's likely that that will be a higher material cost. So in effect, you still bear the full burden of that legislation, and therefore your carbon data now directly affects your competitiveness and your input costs as a business.
Hmm. Okay, so there is a lot to take in, and even if your products aren't, those primary areas that you talked about, electricity, steel, um, fertilizer, and so on, this is coming down the line. This is going to become effectively like tax. It's just going to be a thing everyone has to cater for. And are there specific systems that you recommend or that you work with in terms of how people work out the carbon? If I'm a supplier, how how do I work this stuff out to begin with? I've got a bill of materials. I've got my supplier data. Where do I start with that?
Yeah. So I think, again, going back to looking at your scope one, two, three emissions is a key starting point, and will stand you in good stead to have that emissions data and know that it's accurate. You can also look at verification through external bodies who will look at your data and be able to provide verification of that data that is accurate and maintained. But again, for SMEs, you're just looking at your scope one, two, three emissions. There are lots of tools available online. The government, they published a complete guide to scope one, two, three for UK companies as well. So there is so much support out there. But again, it goes back to, if you're struggling, ask somebody. And even like we mentioned, local chambers, they have export sessions. Ask your local chamber, look, this is what I'm struggling with. Can you provide a session? Can you provide support? Contact ourselves. Again, we're here to explain, because there is nuance, like I said, in different companies, subsidiaries, supply chains, where that production lies. So it is complex, but there is support out there. And yeah, don't try and model through it alone, because yeah, you could end up paying a higher end fee as well if you try and do that.
Yeah, if you just tick the default box, you're definitely not doing yourself any favors. Not to mention all the potential on hidden savings that could be there in your business if you start to look for them. Um, you possibly just answered this question just based on what you just said, but I always ask, my guest to leave listeners with one final actionable piece of advice to round things off, and that will get you to sort of give us your website address and whatnot in a second as well. But what would you say to an SME today? And it's January 2026, and what should they think about first?
Okay, I would say number one, you need to check if you're in scope, because that's obviously critical to any journey. Number two, I would say stop estimating and start measuring. I would make that so key to your process in this, because I think, yes, you can get away with estimations, but you're only going to harm yourself down the line. And again, when you're looking at your supply chain and future proofing your business, they will expect accurate information. And if you can't provide it, another SME or another company will. So start measuring. And I would also say, for example, we have a company we're working with, and this has actually formed part of a project for a funded apprenticeship. So again, it's an opportunity to involve young people in your business who actually typically care more about decarbonisation, on average, because it's our future. And it's an opportunity for them to be involved and really understand your business and give them a purpose. But then there's also added benefits of, there's grants and there's funding out there, as we've talked about. Having an understanding of your data can give you a wide view on, okay, is there an R&D opportunity here? Is there grant funding available? Can we, we've identified this specific part and our production needs to change. Is this a novel thing? Are we pioneering for our industry? Again, it's looking at how do you be the best you can be and set an example for other companies. So check you're in scope, start measuring, look at opportunities to involve other, grants, funding, etc. And then the final piece of advice, I would say, it's to check what tools you can use and leverage those tools, whether that's automation, whether that's looking at AI as well in your reporting, and maybe you can sort of look at algorithms to identify, well, maybe you should look at this, or there's this alert that we can check. And again, it comes down to whether or not you have certain views about climate change. It does not dispute the fact that if you optimize your resource, if you're looking at where your energy spend is, what the cost of your product is to produce, you are inevitably going to impact your bottom line. So it is an opportunity and not a burden.
Absolutely. Here. I mean, I've said this in other episodes. There's just, it's just a no-brainer. Operating more efficiently, whether it helps save the planet or not. Which hey, who doesn't like clean air to breathe and predictable weather? But yeah, that impact on the bottom line, and what I'm hearing as well is that this is a competitive advantage in its own right. You mentioned earlier about if you can't provide this data, you're out of the game. So if you can provide it and make it accurate and make it super accessible for systems to talk to each other, then that in itself is going to be a selling point over other potential more laggard competitors. So thanks very much, Rebecca. Can you just where do people get in touch with you? How do they get to play with the calculator?
Yeah, sure. So best to go to our website. So that's nexusearthgroup.com. And I'm sure Rich will be able to put that in the description or the blurb. We're also on LinkedIn, and connect with me there if you've got any more questions. Our tools and resources will be on the website, and again, I'll provide Rich with the links to them, so it should be really easy to access and download.
Happy days. Yeah, we'll get that all linked up in the show notes. And once again, Rebecca, it's been a pleasure having you on to Made to Grow, and thanks for your time. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks very much for the invitation. And I suppose when this goes out, it won't be Happy Christmas, it'll be Happy New Year. So
exactly. Yeah. Here comes January. Cool. Okay. Thanks a lot, Rebecca. What an insightful way to kick off Series 4. Rebecca has made it crystal clear, burying your head in the sand is no longer an option. Whether you are in scope for the relevant raw materials or not, the message is the same. Stop estimating and start measuring. The competitive advantage that comes from accurate data, system automation, and discovering hidden inefficiencies in your plant is a no-brainer for your bottom line. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the Nexus Earth Group website and the tools and resources Rebecca mentioned to help you assess your potential CBAM costs. Until next time, Happy New Year and get measuring.